My next question is for the course of Classical Ethics,
Yeah.
Chapter 4.
Okay.
Okay,
Classical Ethics, Chapter 4. Let me get there.
that's right.
All right, I'm there.
Yeah, okay. So, wait, my question is, why is it better to learn from principles instead of to principles? Because my sister says that she thinks it's because it is clearer to learn from principles because um, they're clear and they lead to a conclusion quicker than if we start by studying the opinions of separate individuals because they vary.
Yeah. Well, the
Is
idea,
that
no,
is that right?
well, let's just make sure we understand what this means. When we talk about moving from principles to, I think what you're talking about is reasoning from principles and reasoning to principles. Is that the idea you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
That's
what that's talking about, I think better than principles is the term universals. Okay. So in philosophy, we seek to know a universal truth, like human beings are evil, right? That's a universal truth. Men are evil by nature, by original sin. Men are evil. So anytime you meet a person, you can conclude rationally that this person is evil, right? And that's why you should always be careful. Okay? That's why you don't trust strangers, because you should always assume that everyone is evil until you have reason to believe that he fears God and he chooses to not be evil. He has self-control. We start with universals and we reason down to make conclusions about individual things. That's what philosophy is for. All right, that's reasoning. That's deductive reasoning. Okay, that's one thing. The problem with that is it's hard for us to know what those universals are. And it's easy for us sitting 2,000 years after Christ to have these books and books and books filled with all of these philosophical teachings. But Aristotle didn't have these books. You see what I mean?
yes.
So Aristotle had to figure out what these universal truths were. St. Thomas Aquinas had to figure out what the universal truths were. They didn't have them. So how do you figure out the universal truths? You start with individuals and you have to start working your way up to the universals. You see what I mean?
Yes.
Then when you know the universal and you've demonstrated the universal, now I can teach that to my son and he has the benefit of using the universal, but I didn't have that. You see what I mean?
Okay.
So yes, and what your sister's saying is true. After the universal has already been discovered and explained to everybody, right? But when the universals aren't known, we can't start with universals. You see what I mean?
Yes, because it would take too much time
We
to get
can't.
it.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's why God revealed things to us, because God basically taught us universals. That's what he revealed to us. Because left to ourselves, we would know very little. We'd be able to figure out very little. So when God reveals things, he reveals to us universals, and he's talking to us from the top down. He's revealing the universal to us, and then we use that to guide our life. So for example, when God says, you shall not kill, he gives us a universal moral teaching, right? It is immoral to kill. And so now we can apply that to every situation. So if my son, does something to make me angry, the universal tells me I'm not allowed to kill him, right? I have to control myself and make sure I don't kill him, because it's never okay to kill. And that raises debates about, well, is it ever okay to kill? And that's a different question. But God reveals universals to us. If it wasn't for divine revelation, we wouldn't know any of the stuff that we know. Even when we look back to Aristotle, if you go into the history of Aristotle and Plato was Aristotle's teacher, but Plato learned from the Egyptians. He learned a lot of his philosophical ideas from the Egyptians, and tradition tells us that the Egyptians learned a lot of their philosophical ideas from the Jewish patriarchs.
Oh, yes.
Do you see what I mean? So,
Because God revealed to them. Okay.
like Solomon, God revealed wisdom to Solomon, and once that wisdom was revealed to Solomon, it just sort of trickled and spread everywhere. So all of a sudden, men know things, and they may not know where it came from, but ultimately it came from God through revelation. And so many of the philosophical truths that we know them because they're connected to divine revelation that was given years and years and years before. Solomon lived in 1000 BC. That's 650 years before Aristotle, right?
Right.
Moses lived even, Moses was what, 200 or 400 years before Solomon. So this wisdom was revealed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before. And it sort of trickled and spread out through different societies as the Jews interacted with different people,
Yes.
So we can't start with universals because they're impossible for us to know. We can only start with universals if they're revealed to us, or if after long, long periods of study, we're able to draw conclusions that are universal. So we just can't. But once we learn the universal, then we use universals, because that's much easier to think like that than to try to figure out things by our own research, right?
Oh, okay. I see now. Okay, so it's better to start from universals once they are revealed.
That's right. And we have to be careful, because if a universal is wrong, if a universal is false, then it leads us to false conclusions, right?
Right.
So if I were to make, this is what we call prejudice and racism, right? Like if I say all Mexicans are blank, you see that, how can I make that statement unless I know it's actually true of every single Mexican person? You see that? So when we talk about prejudice and racism, it's because people make universal statements that are not true, that aren't proven. And then if I meet you and you're a Mexican, I say, oh, you're a Mexican. Oh, all Mexicans are this, therefore you are this. Well, if that universal is false, then my conclusions are all false. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So it's very hard for us. It's very hard for us to know universal things, and that's why, statements like that would be foolish, because there's no way for us to know that. We can only make universal statements if we know for certain that they're true. That's the challenge. That's what's difficult about universal statements. Okay?
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah.